The Story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, brought to you by Digital Archive. In a town in Persia, there lived two brothers, one named Qasim, the other Ali Baba. Their father left them scarcely anything, but as he had divided his little property equally between them, it would seem that their fortune ought to have been equal, but chance determined otherwise. Qasim married a wife, who soon after became heiress to a large sum and to a warehouse full of rich goods, so that he all at once became one of the richest and most considerable merchants, and lived at his ease. Ali Baba, on the other hand, who had married a woman as poor as himself, lived in a very wretched habitation, and had no other means to maintain his wife and children but his daily labour of cutting wood and bringing it to town to sell upon 3 asses, which were his whole substance. One day, when Ali Baba was in the forest and had just cut wood enough to load his asses, he saw at a distance a great cloud of dust which seemed to be driven toward him. He observed it very attentively and distinguished soon after a body of horse. Though there had been no rumour of robbers in that country, Ali Baba began to think that they might prove such, and without considering what might become of his asses, was resolved to save himself. He climbed up a large, thick tree, whose branches, at a little distance from the ground, were so close to one another that there was but little space between them. He placed himself in the middle, from whence he could see all that passed without being discovered, and the tree stood at the base of a single rock, so steep and craggy that nobody could climb up it. The troop, who were all well mounted and armed, came to the foot of this rock, and there dismounted. Ali Baba counted 40 of them, and, from their looks and equipage, was assured that they were robbers. Nor was he mistaken in his opinion, for they were a troop of banditti, who, without doing any harm to the neighbourhood, robbed at a distance, and made that place their rendezvous. But what confirmed him in his opinion was, that every man unbridled his horse, tied him to some shrub, and hung about his neck a bag of corn which they brought behind them. Then each of them took his saddle wallet, which seemed to Ali Baba to be full of gold and silver from its weight. One, who was the most personable amongst them, and whom he took to be their captain, came with his wallet on his back under the tree in which Ali Baba was concealed, and making his way through some shrubs, pronounced these words so distinctly, "Open, Sesame!" that Ali Baba heard him. As soon as the captain of the robbers had uttered these words, a door opened in the rock, and after he had made all his troop enter before him, he followed them, when the door shut again of itself. The robbers stayed some time within the rock, and Ali Baba, who feared that someone, or all of them together, might come out and catch him, if he should endeavour to make his escape, was obliged to sit patiently in the tree. He was nevertheless tempted to get down, mount one of their horses, and lead another, driving his asses before him with all the haste he could to town. But the uncertainty of the event made him choose the safest course. At last the door opened again, and the 40 robbers came out. As the captain went in last, he came out first, and stood to see them all pass by him, when Ali Baba heard him make the door close by pronouncing these words, "Shut, Sesame!" Every man went and bridled his horse, fastened his wallet, and mounted again. And when the captain saw them all ready, he put himself at their head, and they returned the way they had come. Ali Baba did not immediately quit his tree, for, said he to himself, they may have forgotten something and may come back again, and then I shall be taken. He followed them with his eyes as far as he could see them, and afterward stayed a considerable time before he descended. Remembering the words the captain of the robbers used to cause the door to open and shut, he had the curiosity to try if his pronouncing them would have the same effect. Accordingly, he went among the shrubs, and perceiving the door concealed behind them, stood before it, and said, "Open, Sesame!" The door instantly flew wide open. Ali Baba, who expected a dark, dismal cavern, was surprised to see it well lighted and spacious, in the form of a vault which received the light from an opening at the top of the rock. He saw all sorts of provisions, rich bales of silk stuff, brocade and valuable carpeting piled upon one another, gold and silver ingots in great heaps, and money in bags. The sight of all these riches made him suppose that this cave must have been occupied for ages by robbers who had succeeded one another. Ali Baba did not stand long to consider what he should do, but went immediately into the cave, and as soon as he had entered, the door shut of itself. But this did not disturb him, because he knew the secret to open it again. He never regarded the silver, but made the best use of his time in carrying out as much of the gold coin as he thought his 3 asses could carry. He collected his asses, which were dispersed, and when he had loaded them with the bags, laid wood over in such a manner that they could not be seen. When he had done, he stood before the door, and pronouncing the words, "Shut, Sesame!" The door closed after him, for it had shut of itself while he was within, but remained open while he was out. He then made the best of his way to town. When Ali Baba got home, he drove his asses into a little yard, shut the gates very carefully, threw off the wood that covered the bags, carried them into his house, and ranged them in order before his wife, who sat on a sofa. His wife handled the bags, and finding them full of money, suspected that her husband had been robbing, insomuch that she could not help saying, "Ali Baba, have you been so unhappy as to—" "Be quiet, wife," interrupted Ali Baba. "Do not frighten yourself. I am no robber, unless he may be one who steals from robbers. You will no longer entertain an ill opinion of me when I shall tell you my good fortune." He then emptied the bags, which raised such a great heap of gold as dazzled his wife's eyes, and when he had done, told her the whole adventure from beginning to end, and, above all, recommended her to keep it secret. The wife, cured of her fears, rejoiced with her husband at their good fortune, and would count all the gold piece by piece. "Wife," replied Ali Baba, "you do not know what you undertake when you pretend to count the money. You will never have done. I will dig a hole and bury it. There is no time to be lost." "You are in the right, husband," replied she, "but let us know, as nigh as possible, how much we have. I will borrow a small measure in the neighborhood and measure it, while you dig the hole." "What you are going to do is to no purpose, wife," said Ali Baba. "If you would take my advice, you had better let it alone, but keep the secret and do what you please." Away, the wife ran to her brother-in-law Kasim, who lived just by but was not then at home, and addressing herself to his wife, desired her to lend her a measure for a little while. Her sister-in-law asked her whether she would have a great or a small one. The wife asked for a small one. The sister-in-law agreed to lend one, but as she knew Ali Baba's poverty, she was curious to know what sort of grain his wife wanted to measure, and artfully putting some sweat at the bottom of the measure, brought it to her with an excuse that she was sorry that she had made her stay so long, but that she could not find it sooner. Ali Baba's wife went home, set the measure upon the heap of gold, filled it, and emptied it often upon the sofa, till she had done, when she was very well satisfied to find the number of measures amounted to so many as they did, and went to tell her husband, who had almost finished digging the hole. While Ali Baba was burying the gold, his wife, to show her exactness and diligence to her sister-in-law, carried the measure back again, but without taking notice that a piece of gold had stuck to the bottom. "Sister," said she, giving it to her again, "you see that I have not kept your measure long. I am obliged to you for it and return it with thanks." As soon as her sister-in-law was gone, Kasim's wife looked at the bottom of the measure and was inexpressibly surprised to find a piece of gold stuck to it. Envy immediately possessed her breast. "What?" said she. "Has Ali Baba gold so plentiful as to measure it? Where has that poor wretch got all this wealth?" Kasim, her husband, was not at home, but at his counting-house, which he left always in the evening. His wife waited for him, and thought the time and age. So great was her impatience to tell him the circumstance, at which she guessed he would be as much surprised as herself. When Kasim came home, his wife said to him, "Kasim, I know you think yourself rich, but you are much mistaken. Ali Baba is infinitely richer than you. He does not count his money, but measures it." Kasim desired her to explain the riddle, which she did, by telling him the stratagem she had used to make the discovery, and showed him the piece of money, which was so old that they could not tell in what prince's reign it was coined. Kasim, instead of being pleased, conceived a base envy at his brother's prosperity. He could not sleep all that night, and went to him in the morning before sunrise, although after he had married the rich widow, he had never treated him as a brother, but neglected him. "Ali Baba," said he, accosting him, "you are very reserved in your affairs. You pretend to be miserably poor, and yet you measure gold." "How, brother?" replied Ali Baba. "I do not know what you mean. Explain yourself." "Do not pretend ignorance," replied Kasim, showing him the piece of gold his wife had given him. "How many of these pieces," added he, "have you?" "My wife found this at the bottom of the measure you borrowed yesterday." By this discourse, Ali Baba perceived that Kasim and his wife, through his own wife's folly, knew what they had so much reason to conceal. But what was done could not be recalled. Therefore, without showing the least surprise or trouble, he confessed all, told his brother by what chance he had discovered this retreat of the thieves, in what place it was, and offered him part of his treasure to keep the secret. "I expect as much," replied Kasim haughtily. "But I must know exactly where this treasure is, and how I may visit it myself when I choose. Otherwise I will go and inform against you, and then you will not only get no more, but will lose all you have, and I shall have a share for my information." Ali Baba, more out of his natural good temper than frightened by the menaces of his unnatural brother, told him all he desired, and even the very words he was to use to gain admission into the cave. Kasim, who wanted no more of Ali Baba, left him, resolving to be beforehand with him, and hoping to get all the treasure to himself. He rose the next morning long before the sun, and set out for the forest with 10 mules bearing great chests, which he designed to fill, and followed the road which Ali Baba had pointed out to him. He was not long before he reached the rock, and found out the place by the tree and other marks which his brother had given him. When he reached the entrance of the cavern, he pronounced the words, "Open, Sesame," and the door immediately opened, and when he was in, closed upon him. In examining the cave, he was in great admiration to find much more riches than he had apprehended from Ali Baba's account. He was so covetous and greedy of wealth that he could have spent the whole day in feasting his eyes with so much treasure, if the thought that he came to carry some away had not hindered him. He laid as many bags of gold as he could carry at the door of the cavern, but his thoughts were so full of the great riches he should possess that he could not think of the necessary word to make it open, but instead of "Sesame," said, "Open, barley," and was much amazed to find that the door remained fast shut. He named several sorts of grain, but still the door would not open. Kasim had never expected such an incident, and was so alarmed at the danger he was in, that the more he endeavored to remember the word "sesame," the more his memory was confounded, and he had as much forgotten it as if he had never heard it mentioned. He threw down the bags he had loaded himself with, and walked distractedly up and down the cave, without having the least regard to the riches that were round him. About noon the robbers chanced to visit their cave, and at some distance from it saw Kasim's mules straggling about the rock with great chests on their backs. Alarmed at this novelty, they galloped full speed to the cave. They drove away the mules, which Kasim had neglected to fasten, and they strayed through the forest so far that they were soon out of sight. the robbers never gave themselves the trouble to pursue them, being more concerned to know to whom they belonged. And while some of them searched about the rock, the captain and the rest went directly to the door, with their naked sabres in their hands, and pronouncing the proper words, it opened. Kasim was so alarmed at the danger he was in that the more he endeavoured to remember the word sesame, the more his memory was confounded. Kasim, who heard the noise of the horses' feet from the middle of the cave, never doubted of the arrival of the robbers and his approaching death, but was resolved to make one effort to escape from them. To this end he rushed to the door, and no sooner heard the word sesame, which he had forgotten, and saw the door open, than he ran out and threw the leader down, but could not escape the other robbers, who with their sabres soon deprived him of life. The first care of the robbers after this was to examine the cave. They found all the bags which Kasim had brought to the door to be ready to load his mules, and carried them again to their places, without missing what Ali Baba had taken away before. Then, holding a council and deliberating upon this occurrence, they guessed that Kasim, when he was in, could not get out again, but could not imagine how he had entered. It came into their heads that he might have got down by the top of the cave, but the aperture by which it received light was so high, and the rocks so inaccessible without, that they gave up this conjecture. That he came in at the door they could not believe, however, unless he had the secret of making it open. In short, none of them could imagine which way he had entered, for they were all persuaded nobody knew their secret, little imagining that Ali Baba had watched them. It was a matter of the greatest importance to them to secure their riches. They agreed therefore to cut Kasim's body into quarters, to hang 2 on one side and 2 on the other, within the door of the cave, to terrify any person who should attempt again to enter. They had no sooner taken this resolution than they put it in execution, and when they had nothing more to detain them, left the place of their hoards well closed. They then mounted their horses, went to beat the roads again, and to attack the caravans they might meet. In the meantime, Kasim's wife was very uneasy when night came, and her husband was not returned. She ran to Ali Baba in alarm and said, "I believe, brother-in-law, that you know Kasim, your brother, is gone to the forest, and upon what account? It is now night, and he is not returned. I am afraid some misfortune has happened to him." Ali Baba, who had expected that his brother, after what he had said, would go to the forest, had declined going himself that day, for fear of giving him any umbrage. Therefore told her, without any reflection upon her husband's unhandsome behaviour, that she need not frighten herself, for that certainly Kasim would not think it proper to come into the town till the night should be pretty far advanced. Kasim's wife, considering how much it concerned her husband to keep the business secret, was the more easily persuaded to believe her brother-in-law. She went home again, and waited patiently till midnight. She repented of her foolish curiosity, and cursed her desire of penetrating into the affairs of her brother and sister-in-law. She spent all the night in weeping, and as soon as it was day went to them, telling them by her tears the cause of her coming. Ali Baba did not wait for his sister-in-law to desire him to go and see what was become of Kasim, but departed immediately with his 3 asses, begging of her first to moderate her affliction. He went to the forest, and when he came near the rock, having seen neither his brother nor the mules in his way, was seriously alarmed at finding some blood spilt near the door, which he took for an ill omen. But when he had pronounced the word, and the door had opened, he was struck with horror at the dismal sight of his brother's body. Without adverting to the little fraternal affection his brother had shown for him, Ali Baba went into the cave to find something to enshroud his remains, and having loaded one of his asses with them, covered them over with wood. The other 2 asses he loaded with bags of gold, covering them with wood also as before, and then bidding the door shut, came away, but was so cautious as to stop some time at the end of the forest that he might not go into the town before night. When he came home, he drove the 2 asses loaded with gold into his little yard, and left the care of unloading them to his wife, while he led the other to his sister-in-law's house. Ali Baba knocked at the door, which was opened by Morgiana, an intelligent slave, fruitful in inventions to ensure success in the most difficult undertakings, and Ali Baba knew her to be such. When he came into the court, he unloaded the ass, and taking Morgiana aside, said to her, "The first thing I ask of you is an inviolable secrecy, both for your mistress's sake and mine. Your master's body is contained in these 2 bundles, and our business is to bury him as if he had died a natural death. Go, tell your mistress I want to speak with her, and mind what I have said to you." Morgiana went to her mistress, and Ali Baba followed her. "Well, brother," said she with impatience, "what news do you bring me of my husband? I perceive no comfort in your countenance." "Sister," answered Ali Baba, "I cannot satisfy your inquiries unless you hear my story without speaking a word, for it is of as great importance to you as to me to keep what has happened secret." "Alas," said she, "this preamble lets me know that my husband is not to be found, but at the same time I know the necessity of secrecy, and I must constrain myself. Say on, I will hear you." Ali Baba then detailed the incidents of his journey till he came to the finding of Kasim's body. "Now," said he, "sister, I have something to relate which will afflict you the more, because it is what you so little expect, but it cannot now be remedied. If my endeavours can comfort you, I offer to put that which God hath sent me to what you have, and marry you, assuring you that my wife will not be jealous, and that we shall live happily together. If this proposal is agreeable to you, we must think of acting so that my brother should appear to have died a natural death. I think you may leave the management of the business to Morgiana, and I will contribute all that lies in my power to your consolation. What could Kasim's widow do better than accept of this proposal? For though her first husband had left behind him a plentiful substance, his brother was now much richer, and by the discovery of this treasure might be still more so. Instead, therefore, of rejecting the offer, she regarded it as the sure means of comfort, and drying up her tears, which had begun to flow abundantly, and suppressing the outcries usual with women who have lost their husbands, showed Ali Baba that she approved of his proposal. Ali Baba left the widow, recommended to Morgiana to act her part well, and then returned home with his ass. Morgiana went out at the same time to an apothecary, and asked for a sort of lozenges which he prepared, and were very efficacious in the most dangerous disorders. The apothecary inquired who was ill at her master's. She replied with a sigh, her good master Kasim himself, that they knew not what his disorder was, but that he could neither eat nor speak. After these words, Morgiana carried the lozenges home with her, and the next morning went to the same apothecary's again, and with tears in her eyes, asked for an essence which they used to give to sick people only when at the last extremity. "Alas," said she, taking it from the apothecary, "I am afraid that this remedy will have no better effect than the lozenges, and that I shall lose my good master." On the other hand, as Ali Baba and his wife were often seen to go between Kasim's and their own house all that day, and to seem melancholy, nobody was surprised in the evening to hear the lamentable shrieks and cries of Kasim's wife and Morgiana, who gave out everywhere that her master was dead. The next morning, soon after day appeared, Morgiana, who knew a certain old cobbler that opened his stall early, before other people, went to him, and bidding him good morrow, put a piece of gold into his hand. "Well," said Baba Mustafa, which was his name, and who was a merry old fellow, looking at the gold, "this is good Hansel. What must I do for it? I am ready." "Baba Mustafa," said Morgiana. "You must take with you your sewing tackle, and go with me. But I must tell you, I shall blindfold you when you come to such a place." Baba Mustafa seemed to hesitate a little at these words. "Oh, oh," replied he, "you would have me do something against my conscience or against my honor?" "God forbid," said Morgiana, putting another piece of gold into his hand, "that I should ask anything that is contrary to your honor. Only come along with me and fear nothing." Baba Mustafa went with Morgiana, who, after she had bound his eyes with a handkerchief, conveyed him to her deceased master's house, and never unloosed his eyes till he had entered the room where she had put the corpse together. "Baba Mustafa," said she, "you must make haste and sew these quarters together, and when you have done, I will give you another piece of gold." After Baba Mustafa had finished his task, she blindfolded him again, gave him the third piece of gold as she had promised, and recommending secrecy to him, carried him back to the place where she first bound his eyes, pulled off the bandage, and let him go home, but watched him that he returned toward his stall till he was quite out of sight, for fear he should have the curiosity to return and track her. By the time Morgiana had warmed some water to wash the body, Ali Baba came with incense to embalm it, after which it was sewn up in a winding sheet. Not long after, the joiner, according to Ali Baba's orders, brought the bier which Morgiana received at the door, and helped Ali Baba to put the body into it, when she went to the mosque to inform the imam that they were ready. The people of the mosque, whose business it was to wash the dead, offered to perform their duty, but she told them that it was done already. Morgiana had scarcely got home before the imam and the other ministers of the mosque arrived. 4 neighbors carried the corpse on their shoulders to the burying ground, following the imam, who recited some prayers. Morgiana, as a slave to the deceased, followed the corpse, weeping, beating her breast and tearing her hair. And Ali Baba came after with some neighbors, who often relieved the others in carrying the corpse to the burying ground. Kasim's wife stayed at home mourning, uttering lamentable cries with the women of the neighborhood, who came according to custom during the funeral, and joining their lamentations with hers, filled the quarter far and near with sorrow. In this manner Kasim's melancholy death was concealed and hushed up between Ali Baba, his wife, Kasim's widow, and Morgiana, with so much contrivance that nobody in the city had the least knowledge or suspicion of the cause of it. 3 or 4 days after the funeral, Ali Baba removed his few goods openly to the widow's house, but the money he had taken from the robbers he conveyed thither by night. Soon after the marriage with his sister-in-law was published, and as these marriages are common in the Mussulman religion, nobody was surprised. As for Kasim's warehouse, Ali Baba gave it to his own eldest son, promising that if he managed it well, he would soon give him a fortune to marry very advantageously according to his situation. Let us now leave Ali Baba to enjoy the beginning of his good fortune, and return to the 40 robbers. They came again at the appointed time to visit their retreat in the forest, but great was their surprise to find Kasim's body taken away, with some of their bags of gold. "We are certainly discovered," said the captain, "and if we do not speedily apply some remedy, shall gradually lose all the riches which we have, with so much pains and danger, been so many years amassing together. All that we can think of the loss which we have sustained is, that the thief whom we surprised had the secret of opening the door, and we arrived luckily as he was coming out, but his body being removed, and with it some of our money, plainly shows that he had an accomplice, and as it is likely that there were but 2 who had discovered our secret, and one has been caught, we must look narrowly after the other. What say you, my lads?" All the robbers thought the captain's proposal so advisable that they unanimously approved of it, and agreed that they must lay all other enterprises aside, to follow this closely, and not give it up till they had succeeded. "I expected no less," said the captain, "from your fidelity. But first of all, one of you who is artful and enterprising must go into the town disguised as a traveler to try if he can hear any talk of the strange death of the man whom we have killed as he deserved, and endeavor to find out who he was and where he lived. This is a matter of the first importance for us to ascertain, that we may do nothing which we may have reason to repent of by discovering ourselves in a country where we have lived so long unknown. But to warn him who shall take upon himself this commission, and to prevent our being deceived by his giving us a false report, I ask you all, if you do not think that in case of treachery or even error of judgment, he should suffer death. Without waiting for the suffrages of his companions, one of the robbers started up and said, I submit to this condition, and think it an honor to expose my life by taking the commission upon me. But remember, at least if I do not succeed, that I neither wanted courage nor goodwill to serve the troop. After this robber had received great commendations from the captain, he disguised himself, and taking his leave of the troop that night, went into the town just at daybreak, and walked up and down, till accidentally he came to Baba Mustafa's stall, which was always open before any of the shops. Baba Mustafa was seated with an awl in his hand, just going to work. The robber saluted him, bidding him good morrow, and perceiving that he was old, said, Honest man, you begin to work very early. Is it possible that one of your age can see so well? I question, even if it were somewhat lighter, whether you could see to stitch. Certainly, replied Baba Mustafa. You must be a stranger, and do not know me. For old as I am, I have extraordinarily good eyes, and you will not doubt it when I tell you that I sewed a dead body together in a place where I had not so much light as I have now. The robber was overjoyed to think that he had addressed himself, at his first coming into the town, to a man who in all probability could give him the intelligence he wanted. A dead body, replied he with affected amazement. What could you sew up a dead body for? You mean you sewed up his winding sheet? No, no, answered Baba Mustafa. I perceive your meaning. You want to have me speak out, but you shall know no more. The robber wanted no farther assurance to be persuaded that he had discovered what he sought. He pulled out a piece of gold, and putting it into Baba Mustafa's hand, said to him, I do not want to learn your secret, though I can assure you I would not divulge it, if you trusted me with it. The only thing which I desire of you is to do me the favor to show me the house where you stitched up the dead body. If I were disposed to do you that favor, replied Baba Mustafa, holding the money in his hand, ready to return it, I assure you I cannot. I was taken to a certain place where I was blinded. I was then led to the house and afterward brought back again in the same manner. You see, therefore, the impossibility of my doing what you desire. Well, replied the robber, you may, however, remember a little of the way that you were led blindfolded. Come, let me blind your eyes at the same place. We will walk together. Perhaps you may recognize some part, and as everybody ought to be paid for his trouble, there is another piece of gold for you. Gratify me in what I ask you. So saying, he put another piece of gold into his hand. The 2 pieces of gold were great temptations to Baba Mustafa. He looked at them a long time in his hand, without saying a word, thinking with himself what he should do. But at last, he pulled out his purse and put them in. I cannot assure you, said he to the robber, that I can remember the way exactly, but since you desire, I will try what I can do. At these words Baba Mustafa rose up, to the great joy of the robber, and without shutting his shop where he had nothing valuable to lose, he led the robber to the place where Morgiana had bound his eyes. It was here, said Baba Mustafa. I was blindfolded, and I turned as you see me. The robber, who had his handkerchief ready, tied it over his eyes, walked by him till he stopped, partly leading, and partly guided by him. "I think," said Baba Mustafa, "I went no farther." And he had now stopped directly at Kasim's house, where Ali Baba then lived. The thief, before he pulled off the band, marked the door with a piece of chalk, which he had ready in his hand, and then asked him if he knew whose house that was, to which Baba Mustafa replied that as he did not live in that neighborhood, he could not tell. The robber, finding he could discover no more from Baba Mustafa, thanked him for the trouble he had taken and left him to go back to his stall while he returned to the forest, persuaded that he should be very well received. A little after the robber and Baba Mustafa had parted, Morgiana went out of Ali Baba's house upon some errand, and upon her return, seeing the mark the robber had made, stopped to observe it. "What can be the meaning of this mark?" said she to herself. "Somebody intends my master no good. However, with whatever intention it was done, it is advisable to guard against the worst." Accordingly, she fetched a piece of chalk and marked 2 or 3 doors on each side in the same manner, without saying a word to her master or mistress. In the meantime, the thief rejoined his troop in the forest and recounted to them his success. All the robbers listened to him with the utmost satisfaction. When the captain, after commending his diligence, addressing himself to them all, said, "Comrades, we have no time to lose. Let us set off well armed, but that we may not excite any suspicion, let only 1 or 2 go into the town together and join at our rendezvous, which shall be the great square. In the meantime, our comrade who brought us the good news, and I, will go and find out the house, that we may consult what had best be done." This plan was approved of by all, and they were soon ready. They filed off in parties of 2 each, and got into the town without being in the least suspected. The captain, and he who had visited the town in the morning as spy, came in the last. He led the captain into the street where he had marked Ali Baba's residence, and when they came to the first of the houses which Morgiana had marked, he pointed it out. But the captain observed that the next door was chalked in the same manner, and showing it to his guide, asked him which house it was, that or the first. The guide was so confounded that he knew not what answer to make, but still more puzzled when he saw 5 or 6 houses similarly marked. He assured the captain with an oath that he had marked but one, and could not tell who had chalked the rest, so that he could not distinguish the house which the cobbler had stopped at. The captain, finding that their design had proved abortive, went directly to the place of rendezvous, and told the first of his troop whom he met that they had lost their labour and must return to their cave. When the troop was all got together, the captain told them the reason of their returning, and presently the conductor was declared by all worthy of death. He condemned himself, acknowledging that he ought to have taken better precaution, and prepared to receive the stroke from him who was appointed to cut off his head. Another of the gang, who promised himself that he should succeed better, immediately presented himself, and his offer being accepted, he went and corrupted Baba Mustafa as the other had done, and being shown the house, marked it in a place more remote from sight with red chalk. Not long after, Morgiana, whose eyes nothing could escape, went out, and seeing the red chalk, and arguing with herself as she had done before, marked the other neighbours' houses in the same place and manner. The robber, at his return to his company, valued himself much on the precaution he had taken, which he looked upon as an infallible way of distinguishing Ali Baba's house from the others, and the captain and all of them thought it must succeed. They conveyed themselves into the town with the same precaution as before, but when the robber and his captain came to the street, they found the same difficulty, at which the captain was enraged, and the robber in as great confusion as his predecessor. Thus the captain and his troop were forced to retire a second time, and much more dissatisfied, while the unfortunate robber, who had been the author of the mistake, underwent the same punishment. which he willingly submitted to. The captain, having lost 2 brave fellows of his troop, was afraid of diminishing it too much by pursuing this plan to get information of the residence of their plunderer. He found by their example that their heads were not so good as their hands on such occasions, and therefore resolved to take upon himself the important commission. Accordingly, he went and addressed himself to Baba Mustafa, who did him the same service he had done to the other robbers. He did not set any particular mark on the house, but examined and observed it so carefully by passing often by it that it was impossible for him to mistake it. The captain, well satisfied with his attempt and informed of what he wanted to know, returned to the forest, and when he came into the cave where the troop waited for him, said, "Now, comrades, nothing can prevent our full revenge, as I am certain of the house, and in my way hither I have thought how to put it into execution. But if anyone can form a better expedient, let him communicate it." He then told them his contrivance, and as they approved of it, ordered them to go into the villages about and buy 19 mules, with 38 large leather jars, 1 full of oil and the others empty. In 2 or 3 days' time the robbers had purchased the mules and jars, and as the mouths of the jars were rather too narrow for his purpose, the captain caused them to be widened, and after having put one of his men into each, with the weapons which he thought fit, leaving open the seam which had been undone to leave them room to breathe, he rubbed the jars on the outside with oil from the full vessel. Things being thus prepared, when the 19 mules were loaded with 37 robbers in jars, and the jar of oil, the captain, as their driver, set out with them, and reached the town by the dusk of the evening, as he had intended. He led them through the streets till he came to Ali Baba's, at whose door he designed to have knocked, but was prevented by his sitting there after supper to take a little fresh air. He stopped his mules, addressed himself to him, and said, "I have brought some oil a great way, to sell at tomorrow's market, and it is now so late that I do not know where to lodge. If I should not be troublesome to you, do me the favor to let me pass the night with you, and I shall be very much obliged by your hospitality." Though Ali Baba had seen the captain of the robbers in the forest and had heard him speak, it was hardly possible to know him in the disguise of an oil merchant. He told him he should be welcome, and immediately opened his gates for the mules to go into the yard. At the same time he called to a slave, and ordered him, when the mules were unloaded, to put them into the stable and give them fodder, and then went to Morgiana to bid her get a good supper. He did more. When he saw the captain had unloaded his mules, and that they were put into the stables as he had ordered, and he was looking for a place to pass the night in the air, he brought him into the hall where he received his company, telling him he would not suffer him to be in the court. The captain excused himself on pretense of not being troublesome, but really to have room to execute his design, and it was not till after the most pressing importunity that he yielded. Ali Baba, not content to keep company, till supper was ready with the man who had a design on his life, continued talking with him till it was ended, and repeating his offer of service. The captain rose up at the same time with his host, and while Ali Baba went to speak to Morgiana, he withdrew into the yard under pretence of looking at his mules. Ali Baba, after charging Morgiana afresh to take care of his guest, said to her, "Tomorrow morning I design to go to the bath before day. Take care my bathing linens be ready, give them to Abdullah," which was the slave's name, "and make me some good broth against I return." After this he went to bed. In the meantime, the captain went from the stable to give his people orders what to do, and beginning at the first jar, and so on to the last, said to each man, As soon as I throw some stones out of the chamber window where I lie, do not fail to cut the jar open with the knife you have about you for the purpose, and come out, and I will immediately join you." After this, he returned into the house, when Morgiana, taking up a light, conducted him to his chamber, where she left him. And he, to avoid any suspicion, put the light out soon after, and laid himself down in his clothes, that he might be the more ready to rise. Morgiana, remembering Ali Baba's orders, got his bathing linens ready, and ordered Abdullah to set on the pot for the broth. But while she was preparing it, the lamp went out, and there was no more oil in the house nor any candles. What to do she did not know, for the broth must be made. Abdullah, seeing her very uneasy, said, "Do not fret and tease yourself, but go into the yard and take some oil out of one of the jars." Morgiana thanked Abdullah for his advice, took the oil pot, and went into the yard, when as she came nigh the first jar, the robber within said softly, "Is it time?" Though the robber spoke low, Morgiana was struck with the voice the more, because the captain, when he unloaded the mules, had taken the lids off this and all the other jars to give air to his men, who were ill enough at their ease, almost wanting room to breathe. As much surprised as Morgiana naturally was at finding a man in a jar instead of the oil she wanted, many would have made such an outcry as to have given an alarm, whereas Morgiana, comprehending immediately the importance of keeping silence and the necessity of applying a speedy remedy without noise, conceived at once the means, and collecting herself without showing the least emotion, answered, "Not yet, but presently." She went in this manner to all the jars, giving the same answer, till she came to the jar of oil. By this means, Morgiana found that her master Ali Baba, who thought that he had entertained an oil merchant, had admitted 38 robbers into his house, regarding this pretended merchant as their captain. She made what haste she could to fill her oil pot, and returned into her kitchen, where, as soon as she had lighted her lamp, she took a great kettle, went again to the oil jar, filled the kettle, set it on a large wood fire, and as soon as it boiled, went and poured enough into every jar to stifle and destroy the robber within. When this action, worthy of the courage of Morgiana, was executed without any noise, she returned into the kitchen with the empty kettle, and having put out the great fire she had made to boil the oil, and leaving just enough to make the broth, put out the lamp also, and remained silent, resolving not to go to rest till she had observed what might follow through a window of the kitchen, which opened into the yard. She had not waited long before the captain of the robbers got up, opened the window, and finding no light and hearing no noise, or anyone stirring in the house, gave the appointed signal by throwing little stones, several of which hit the jars, as he doubted not by the sound they gave. He then listened, but not hearing or perceiving anything whereby he could judge that his companions stirred, he began to grow very uneasy, threw stones again a second and also a third time, and could not comprehend the reason that none of them should answer his signal. Much alarmed, he went softly down into the yard, and going to the first jar, whilst asking the robber, whom he thought alive, if he was in readiness, smelt the hot boiled oil, which sent forth a steam out of the jar. Hence he suspected that his plot to murder Ali Baba and plunder his house was discovered. Examining all the jars one after another, he found that all the members of his gang were dead, and by the oil he missed out of the last jar, guessed the means and manner of their death. Enraged to despair at having failed in his design, he forced the lock of a door that led from the yard to the garden, and climbing over the walls, made his escape. When Morgiana heard no noise, and found, after waiting some time, that the captain did not return, she concluded that he had chosen rather to make his escape by the garden than the street door, which was double locked. Satisfied and pleased to have succeeded so well in saving her master and family, she went to bed. Ali Baba rose before day, and, followed by his slave, went to the baths, entirely ignorant of the important event which had happened at home. For Morgiana had not thought it safe to wake him before, for fear of losing her opportunity, and after her successful exploit, she thought it needless to disturb him. When he returned from the baths, the sun was risen. He was very much surprised to see the oil jars, and that the merchant was not gone with the mules. He asked Morgiana, who opened the door, and had let all things stand as they were, that he might see them, the reason of it. "My good master," answered she, "God preserve you and all your family. You will be better informed of what you wish to know when you have seen what I have to show you, if you will but give yourself the trouble to follow me." As soon as Morgiana had shut the door, Ali Baba followed her, when she requested him to look into the first jar and see if there was any oil. Ali Baba did so, and seeing a man, started back in alarm, and cried out. "Do not be afraid," said Morgiana. "The man you see there can neither do you nor anybody else any harm. He is dead." "Ah, Morgiana," said Ali Baba, "what is it you show me? Explain yourself." "I will," replied Morgiana. "Moderate your astonishment, and do not excite the curiosity of your neighbors. Look into all the other jars." Ali Baba examined all the other jars, and when he came to that which had the oil in, found it prodigiously sunk, and stood for some time motionless, sometimes looking at the jars, and sometimes at Morgiana, without saying a word, so great was his surprise. At last, when he had recovered himself, he said, "And what is become of the merchant?" "Merchant," answered she, "he is as much one as I am. I will tell you who he is and what is become of him. But you had better hear the story in your own chamber, for it is time for your health that you had your broth after your bathing." While Ali Baba retired to his chamber, Morgiana went into the kitchen to fetch the broth. But before he would drink it, he first entreated her to satisfy his impatience and tell him what had happened, with all the circumstances. And she obeyed him. "This," she said, when she had completed her story, "is the account you asked of me, and I am convinced it is the consequence of what I observed some days ago, but did not think fit to acquaint you with. For when I came in one morning early, I found our street door marked with white chalk, and the next morning with red. Upon which, both times without knowing what was the intention of those chalks, I marked 2 or 3 neighbours' doors on each side in the same manner. If you reflect on this, and what has since happened, you will find it to be a plot of the robbers of the forest, of whose gang there are 2 wanting, and now they are reduced to 3. All this shows that they had sworn your destruction, and it is proper you should be upon your guard, while there is one of them alive. For my part, I shall neglect nothing necessary to your preservation, as I am in duty bound." When Morgiana had left off speaking, Ali Baba was so sensible of the great service she had done him, that he said to her, "I will not die without rewarding you as you deserve. I owe my life to you, and for the first token of my acknowledgement, give you your liberty from this moment, till I can complete your recompense as I intend. I am persuaded with you that the 40 robbers have laid snares for my destruction. God, by your means, has delivered me from them as yet, and I hope will continue to preserve me from their wicked designs, and deliver the world from their persecution. All that we have to do is to bury the bodies of these pests of mankind immediately, and with all the secrecy imaginable, that nobody may suspect what is become of them, but that labour Abdullah and I will undertake." Ali Baba's garden was very long, and shaded at the farther end by a great number of large trees. Under these he and the slave dug a trench, long and wide enough to hold all the robbers. Afterward, they lifted the bodies out of the jars, took away their weapons, carried them to the end of the garden, laid them in the trench, and levelled the ground again. When this was done, Ali Baba hid the jars and weapons, and as he had no occasion for the mules, he sent them at different times to be sold in the market by his slave. While Ali Baba took these measures to prevent the public from knowing how he came by his riches in so short a time, the captain of the 40 robbers returned to the forest with inconceivable mortification, and in his confusion at his ill success, so contrary to what he had promised himself, entered the cave, not being able, all the way from the town, to come to any resolution how to revenge himself of Ali Baba. The loneliness of the gloomy cavern became frightful to him. "Where are you, my brave lads?" cried he. "Old companions of my watchings, inroads and labor, what can I do without you? Did I collect you only to lose you by so base a fate, and so unworthy of your courage? Had you died with your sabres in your hands like brave men, my regret had been less. When shall I enlist so gallant a troop again? And if I could, can I undertake it without exposing so much gold and treasure to him who hath already enriched himself out of it? I cannot, I ought not to think of it, before I have taken away his life. I will undertake that alone, which I could not accomplish with your powerful assistance, and when I have taken measures to secure this treasure from being pillaged, I will provide for it new masters and successors after me, who shall preserve and augment it to all posterity." This resolution being taken, he was not at a loss how to execute his purpose, but full of hopes, slept all that night very quietly. When he awoke early next morning, he dressed himself, agreeably to the project he had formed, went to the town, and took a lodging in a khan. As he expected what had happened at Ali Baba's might make a great noise, he asked his host what news there was in the city, upon which the innkeeper told him a great many circumstances which did not concern him in the least. He judged by this that the reason why Ali Baba kept his affairs so secret was for fear people should know where the treasure lay, and because he knew his life would be sought on account of it. This urged him the more to neglect nothing to rid himself of so cautious an enemy. The captain now assumed the character of a merchant, and conveyed gradually a great many sorts of rich stuffs and fine linen to his lodging from the cavern, but with all the necessary precautions imaginable to conceal the place whence he brought them. In order to dispose of the merchandise, when he had amassed them together, he took a warehouse, which happened to be opposite to Kasim's, which Ali Baba's son had occupied since the death of his uncle. He took the name of Khaujeh Hussain, and as a newcomer was, according to custom, extremely civil and complacent to all the merchants his neighbors. Ali Baba's son was from his vicinity one of the first to converse with Khaujeh Hussain, who strove to cultivate his friendship more particularly when, 2 or 3 days after he was settled, he recognized Ali Baba, who came to see his son and stopped to talk with him as he was accustomed to do. When he was gone, the impostor learnt from his son who he was. He increased his assiduities, caressed him in the most engaging manner, made him some small presents, and often asked him to dine and sup with him. Ali Baba's son did not choose to lie under such obligation to Khaujeh Hussain without making the like return, but was so much straitened for want of room in his house that he could not entertain him so well as he wished. He therefore acquainted his father Ali Baba with his intention, and told him that it did not look well for him to receive such favors from Khaujeh Hussain without inviting him in return. Ali Baba, with great pleasure, took the treat upon himself. "Son," said he, "tomorrow being Friday, which is a day that the shops of such great merchants as Khaujeh Hussain and yourself are shut, get him to take a walk with you, and as you come back, pass by my door and call in. It will look better to have it happen accidentally than if you gave him a formal invitation. I will go and order Morgiana to provide a supper." The next day, Ali Baba's son and Khaujeh Hussain met by appointment, took their walk, and as they returned, Ali Baba's son led Khaujeh Hussain through the street where his father lived, and when they came to the house, stopped and knocked at the door. "This, sir," said he, "is my father's house, who, from the account I have given him of your friendship, charged me to procure him the honor of your acquaintance." Though it was the sole aim of Khaujeh Hussain to introduce himself into Ali Baba's house, that he might kill him without hazarding his own life or making any noise, yet he excused himself and offered to take his leave. But a slave having opened the door, Ali Baba's son took him obligingly by the hand, and in a manner forced him in. Ali Baba received Khaujeh Hussain with a smiling countenance, and in the most obliging manner. He thanked him for all the favours he had done his son, adding withal, the obligation was the greater, as he was a young man not much acquainted with the world. Khaujeh Hussain returned the compliment by assuring Ali Baba that though his son might not have acquired the experience of older men, he had good sense equal to the knowledge of many others. After a little more conversation on different subjects, he offered again to take his leave, when Ali Baba, stopping him, said, "Where are you going, sir, in so much haste? I beg you would do me the honor to sup with me, though what I have to give you is not worth your acceptance, but such as it is, I hope you will accept it as heartily as I give it." "Sir," replied Khaujeh Hussain, "I am thoroughly persuaded of your good will, and if I ask the favour of you not to take it ill that I do not accept your obliging invitation, I beg of you to believe that it does not proceed from any slight or intention to affront, but from a reason which you would approve if you knew it." "And what may that reason be, sir?" replied Ali Baba, "if I may be so bold as to ask you." "It is," answered Khaujeh Hussain, "that I can eat no victuals that have any salt in them. Therefore judge how I should feel at your table." "If that is the only reason," said Ali Baba, "it ought not to deprive me of the honor of your company at supper, for in the first place, there is no salt ever put into my bread, and as to the meat we shall have tonight, I promise you there shall be none in that. Therefore you must do me the favor to stay. I will return immediately." Ali Baba went into the kitchen and ordered Morgiana to put no salt to the meat that was to be dressed that night, and to make quickly 2 or 3 ragouts besides what he had ordered, but be sure to put no salt in them. Morgiana, who was always ready to obey her master, could not help seeming somewhat dissatisfied at his strange order. "Who is this difficult man," said she, "who eats no salt with his meat? Your supper will be spoiled if I keep it back so long." "Do not be angry, Morgiana," replied Ali Baba. "He is an honest man, therefore do as I bid you." Morgiana obeyed, though with no little reluctance, and had a curiosity to see this man who ate no salt. To this end, when she had finished what she had to do in the kitchen, she helped Abdullah to carry up the dishes, and looking at Khaujeh Hussain, knew him at first sight, notwithstanding his disguise, to be the captain of the robbers, and examining him very carefully, perceived that he had a dagger under his garment. "I am not in the least amazed," said she to herself, "that this wicked wretch, who is my master's greatest enemy, would eat no salt with him, since he intends to assassinate him, but I will prevent him." Morgiana, while they were eating, made the necessary preparations for executing one of the boldest acts ever meditated, and had just determined when Abdullah came for the dessert of fruit, which she carried up, and as soon as he had taken the meat away, set upon the table. After that, she placed 3 glasses by Ali Baba, and going out, took Abdullah with her to sup, and to give Ali Baba the more liberty of conversation with his guest. Khaujeh Hussain, or rather the captain of the robbers, thought he had now a favourable opportunity of being revenged on Ali Baba. "I will," said he to himself, "make the father and son both drunk. The son, whose life I intend to spare, will not be able to prevent my stabbing his father to the heart. And while the slaves are at supper or asleep in the kitchen, I can make my escape over the gardens as before." Instead of going to supper, Morgiana, who had penetrated the intentions of the counterfeit Khaujé Houssain, would not give him time to put his villainous design into execution, but dressed herself neatly with a suitable headdress like a dancer, girded her waist with a silver-gilt girdle, to which there hung a poniard with a hilt and guard of the same metal, and put a handsome mask on her face. When she had thus disguised herself, she said to Abdullah, "Take your tabor, and let us go and divert our master and his son's guest, as we do sometimes when he is alone." Abdullah took his tabor and played all the way into the hall before Morgiana, who, when she came to the door, made a low obeisance, with a deliberate air, in order to draw attention, and by way of asking leave to exhibit her skill. Abdullah, seeing that his master had a mind to say something, left off playing. "Come in, Morgiana," said Ali Baba, "and let Khaujé Houssain see what you can do, that he may tell us what he thinks of you. But, sir," said he, turning toward his guest, "do not think that I put myself to any expense to give you this diversion, since these are my slave and my cook and housekeeper, and I hope you will not find the entertainment they give us disagreeable." Khaujé Houssain, who did not expect this diversion after supper, began to fear he should not be able to improve the opportunity he thought he had found, but hoped, if he now missed his aim, to secure it another time by keeping up a friendly correspondence with the father and son. Therefore, though he could have wished Ali Baba would have declined the dance, he had the complaisance to express his satisfaction at what he saw pleased his host. As soon as Abdullah saw that Ali Baba and Khaujé Houssain had done talking, he began to play on the tabor and accompanied it with an air, to which Morgiana, who was an excellent performer, danced in such a manner as would have created admiration in any other company, besides that before which she now exhibited, among whom, perhaps, none but the false Khaujé Houssain was in the least attentive to her, the rest having seen her so frequently. After she had danced several dances with equal propriety and grace, she drew the poniard, and holding it in her hand, began a dance, in which she outdid herself, by the many different figures, light movements, and the surprising leaps and wonderful exertions with which she accompanied it. Sometimes she presented the poniard to one person's breast, sometimes to another's, and oftentimes seemed to strike her own. At last, as if she was out of breath, she snatched the tabor from Abdullah with her left hand, and holding the dagger in her right, presented the other side of the tabor, after the manner of those who get a livelihood by dancing, and solicit the liberality of the spectators. Ali Baba put a piece of gold into the tabor, as did also his son, and Khaujé Houssain, seeing that she was coming to him, had pulled his purse out of his bosom to make her a present. But while he was putting his hand into it, Morgiana, with a courage and resolution worthy of herself, plunged the poniard into his heart. Ali Baba and his son, shocked at this action, cried out aloud. "Unhappy wretch!" exclaimed Ali Baba. "What have you done to ruin me and my family?" "It was to preserve, not to ruin you," answered Morgiana. "For see here," continued she, opening the pretended Khaujé Houssain's garment and showing the dagger, "what an enemy you had entertained! Look well at him, and you will find him to be both the fictitious oil merchant and the captain of the gang of 40 robbers. Remember, too, that he would eat no salt with you. And what would you have more to persuade you of his wicked design? Before I saw him, I suspected him as soon as you told me you had such a guest. I knew him, and you now find that my suspicion was not groundless." Ali Baba, who immediately felt the new obligation he had to Morgiana for saving his life a second time, embraced her. "Morgiana," said he, "I gave you your liberty, and then promised you that my gratitude should not stop there, but that I would soon give you higher proofs of its sincerity, which I now do by making you my daughter-in-law." Then, addressing himself to his son, he said, "I believe you, son, to be so dutiful a child that you will not refuse Morgiana for your wife. You see that Khaujé Houssain sought your friendship with a treacherous design to take away my life, and if he had succeeded, there is no doubt but he would have sacrificed you also to his revenge. Consider that by marrying Morgiana, you marry the preserver of my family and your own." The son, far from showing any dislike, readily consented to the marriage, not only because he would not disobey his father, but also because it was agreeable to his inclination. After this, they thought of burying the captain of the robbers with his comrades, and did it so privately that nobody discovered their bones till many years after, when no one had any concern in the publication of this remarkable history. A few days afterward, Ali Baba celebrated the nuptials of his son and Morgiana with great solemnity, a sumptuous feast, and the usual dancing and spectacles, and had the satisfaction to see that his friends and neighbours, whom he invited, had no knowledge of the true motives of the marriage, but that those who were not unacquainted with Morgiana's good qualities commended his generosity and goodness of heart. Ali Baba forbore after this marriage from going again to the robber's cave, as he had done, for fear of being surprised, from the time he had brought away his brother Kasim's mangled remains. He had kept away after the death of the 37 robbers and their captain, supposing the other two, whom he could get no account of, might be alive. At the year's end, when he found that they had not made any attempt to disturb him, he had the curiosity to make another journey, taking the necessary precautions for his safety. He mounted his horse, and when he came to the cave and saw no footsteps of men or beasts, looked upon it as a good sign. He alighted, tied his horse to a tree, then approaching the entrance and pronouncing the words, "Open! Sesame!" the door opened. He entered the cavern, and by the condition he found things in, judged that nobody had been there since the false Khaujé Houssain, when he had fetched the goods for his shop, that the gang of 40 robbers was completely destroyed, and no longer doubted that he was the only person in the world who had the secret of opening the cave, so that all the treasure was at his sole disposal. Having brought with him a wallet, he put into it as much gold as his horse would carry, and returned to town. Afterward, Ali Baba carried his son to the cave and taught him the secret, which they handed down to their posterity, who, using their good fortune with moderation, lived in great honor and splendor.